The winter of 1692 fell heavy upon Salem village. Snow pressed down on the roofs of timber houses, and smoke curled from their crooked chimneys. Inside, firelight revealed pale faces, faces marked with worrying, suspicion, and prayer. The Puritans of Salem were a people already haunted by famine, by disease, by war with the native tribes beyond their borders. Yet now, something far darker stalked among them. It began in the parsonage of Reverend Samuel Parris, his daughter Betty, just 9 years old, and his niece Abigail Williams, 11, had fallen into strange fits. They screamed, convulsed, and spoke in tongues no one could understand. They claimed unseen hands were pinching and choking them. At night, their voices carried through the village, echoing with a terror that seemed unholy. The villagers whispered. Some said it was an illness of the mind. Others said it was the devil's hand himself, come to take Salem for his own. And in a world where every shadow hinted at hellfire, fear was quick to find its mark. The small, candlelit room of Reverend Parris became a stage, and soon, others joined the performance. More girls began to writhe, shriek, and see visions of black figures. When pressed, they confessed they had been cursed, and when asked by whom, the answer that followed would ignite the most infamous witch hunt in American history. The first names they spoke were not those of the wealthy or the powerful, but the vulnerable, a Caribbean slave named Tituba, a homeless beggar named Sarah Good, and a frail, elderly woman named Sarah Osborne. By naming them, the children set Salem ablaze with suspicion. What had begun as fits of madness was about to become a trial of faith, one that would consume friend and neighbor alike. The stage was set, and the price would be blood. March 1692. The icy winds had not yet loosened their grip on Salem village when the first 3 women were dragged before the magistrates. Tituba, Reverend Parris' slave, stood before the court with downcast eyes. She was foreign, her skin dark, her ways unfamiliar to the Puritans. To them, she was an easy vessel for Satan. Sarah Good, with her ragged clothes and reputation for begging, was despised by her neighbors, and Sarah Osborne, sickly and bedridden for much of her life, had scandalized the village by living with a man outside of wedlock. In a society that prized obedience, piety, and reputation, these women were already outsiders. Now they were marked. The courtroom swelled with villagers, all eager to hear. The afflicted girls were there too, their bodies twisting, their voices shrieking, as if invisible hands tore at them. Whenever one of the accused looked in their direction, the girls collapsed in torment, clutching their throats and crying that spirits were attacking them. The magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, pressed the women with questions. Sarah Good denied everything. Sarah Osborne, weakened by illness, insisted she was innocent, but it was Tituba who broke the silence that sealed their fate. Perhaps out of fear of the lash, perhaps to save her life, Tituba confessed. She told the court that she had seen black dogs, yellow birds, and the devil himself. She claimed witches were walking among them, more witches than the town could imagine. And most chillingly, she said she had signed the devil's book. The court gasped, the villagers crossed themselves, and the girls shrieked louder, their accusations spilling like wildfire. The seed had been planted. Salem believed. The devil was real, and his followers lived among them. From that moment on, no one was safe. After Tituba's confession, Salem village could no longer rest. The shadow of witchcraft had taken root, and every glance, every whispered word, every unexplained misfortune became a weapon. A cow died in the night. A child fell ill. A loaf of bread burned in the oven. Surely, it was the work of a witch. By April 1692, the list of accused grew longer. The girls pointed their trembling fingers at more neighbors, women of good standing, even respected members of the church. Rebecca Nurse, a pious grandmother, was named. Martha Corey, who had mocked the girls' fits, soon found herself shackled. No one was untouchable. The magistrates summoned accused after accused to the meeting house. The room echoed with cries as the afflicted girls writhed on the floor, screaming that specters tormented them. The accused, bewildered and desperate, tried to defend themselves. But each denial only fueled the girls' convulsions, convincing the judges of guilt. Fear began to eat away at the village's soul. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Old grudges resurfaced. Land disputes, family rivalries, and jealousies found their outlet in accusations of witchcraft. One villager muttered quietly, "This is not the devil's work. This is Salem's." But his voice was lost in the rising tide. The village had chosen its path, and it was paved with chains, prisons, and the gallows. By the summer, the prisons were swelling with the accused. The air in Salem village grew heavy, not just with humidity, but with suspicion. The devil's book had more names, they said, and until all were revealed, the hunt would not stop. Salem was now a town possessed, not by witches, but by fear itself. By May 1692, the prisons of Essex County were overflowing. Men and women accused of witchcraft were crammed into dark, airless cells, awaiting judgment. But Salem had no proper court to try them. Governor William Phips, newly arrived in Massachusetts, established a special tribunal, the Court of Oya and Termina, meaning to hear and determine. Its purpose was clear: to deal swiftly with the rising tide of witchcraft. 7 judges were appointed, led by Chief Justice William Staunton, a man of stern faith and unwavering belief in the devil's power. The trials would not be ordinary. This was not justice as we know it, but justice bent beneath the weight of fear. Most damning of all was the acceptance of spectral evidence. If the afflicted girls claimed to see the spectre, the spirit, of an accused tormenting them, it was treated as proof. In Salem, a person's invisible shape could condemn them, even while their body stood trembling in the courtroom. June 2, 1692, the first formal trial began. Bridget Bishop, a widow known for her fiery temper and bright clothing, was accused of bewitching several girls. Witnesses claimed her spectre pinched, bit, and choked them. They said she kept puppets, dolls used in witchcraft, hidden in her home. Bishop denied the charges, her voice echoing in the crowded chamber. "I am innocent. I am no witch." But innocence mattered little. The afflicted girls collapsed to the floor, writhing, their faces twisted in agony as they cried out her guilt. On June 10, Bridget Bishop was led to Gallows Hill. Before the crowd, she was hanged, the first to die in Salem's frenzy. Her death was meant to silence the devil. Instead, it opened the floodgates. Salem had begun its season of execution. After the hanging of Bridget Bishop, Salem could not turn back. The Court of Oya and Termina moved with frightening speed, feeding the town's hunger for justice, or vengeance. July 19, 1692, -1 women were brought to the gallows. Among them was Rebecca Nurse, the 71-year-old grandmother, beloved by many. Her execution shook the community. If a woman of such piety could be hanged as a witch, then truly no one was safe. The summer heat bore down, and with it came more trials, more shrieks, more confessions torn from trembling lips. Spectral evidence ruled every decision. If the girls cried out, the judges listened. If the accused wept, it was seen as a sign of guilt. In August, 5 more were hanged, including George Burroughs, a former minister of Salem Village. Dragged to the scaffold, he astonished the crowd by reciting the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something no witch was believed capable of doing. For a moment, murmurs rippled through the spectators. Could he truly be innocent? But Staunton, the Chief Justice, silenced doubt. The hangings went on. Burroughs' body swung with the others, and Salem's conscience bent further under the strain. By September, the gallows had claimed 19 lives, men and women alike. Each execution drew crowds. Some prayed, some wept, others watched in grim silence. Children clutched their mothers' skirts as bodies were cut down and thrown into shallow graves. Yet even this was not the cruelest fate. One man, Giles Corey, refused to enter a plea when accused. By law, the court could not try him unless he spoke. To force a confession, they subjected him to pressing, laying heavy stones upon his chest. 4 agonizing days, Corey endured the torture. His final words, as the stones crushed the breath from his lungs, were defiant, more weight. He died without ever confessing, his silence a grave accusation against the court itself. The hysteria had peaked. Salem was drenched in fear, suspicion, and blood. But the storm was not over yet. The darkest shadows were still to come. By the autumn of 1692, the executions weighed heavily on Salem. The gallows had claimed 19 souls, and the prisons were still overflowing. Yet instead of easing the village's fears, the trials only deepened them. The accusations no longer stopped at the poor or the despised. They began creeping higher, toward the respected, the powerful, even the wealthy. In October, the girls accused Margaret Thatcher, not the future figure of England, but a prominent matron of Salem. Others whispered the name of Lady Mary Phipps, the governor's own wife. Suddenly, the hysteria had teeth that could bite too close to home. Doubts began to stir. People remembered the execution of George Burroughs, the minister who had prayed with such conviction before the noose tightened. Could a true man of God have been guilty? And what of Rebecca Nurse, the gentle grandmother? Had the devil truly disguised himself in such forms? Even the ministers of Massachusetts, who had once fueled the fear, started to falter. Increase Mather, father of the famous preacher Cotton Mather, declared, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape, than one innocent person be condemned." This was a dangerous idea in Salem, but one that many secretly agreed with. Meanwhile, the afflicted girls continued their performances, but now some villagers began to see them not as victims, but as liars or pawns of hysteria. Their screams felt rehearsed, their fits suspicious. The court, however, pressed on. Chief Justice Staunton remained unyielding, clinging to spectral evidence as proof. But his foundation was cracking. The very fuel of the trials, the word of children and the unseen world, was starting to lose its fire. And yet, before Salem could awaken, more lives would still be lost. The tide of doubt was rising, but the devil's shadow had not yet lifted. October 1692. The leaves of New England burned red and gold, but Salem's soul was weary and grey. The witch trials had consumed nearly the entire year, leaving scars on families, fields, and faith. At first, the court of Oia and Terminus seemed unstoppable, but now its foundation shook. To many accusations, to many contradictions. Even the most devout Puritans began to whisper that Satan's trickery might not be in the accused, but in the accusers themselves. One of the most damning blows came when Mary Easty, sister of the executed Rebecca Nurse, was condemned. She left the courts with a written petition, pleading not for her own life, but for the madness to end. "I am clear of this sin, but I desire you would take pity of those who suffer unjustly." Her dignity in the face of death struck something in the hearts of Salem. Was it possible the devil had never been there at all? Governor Phipps, alarmed by the growing doubts and the dangerous turn of accusations toward his own household, finally intervened. On October 29, 1692, he ordered the court of Oia and Termina dissolved. Trials would continue, but spectral evidence, the very lifeblood of the hysteria, was no longer admissible. For the afflicted girls, this was a death sentence for their performance. Without their visions and cries, the trials faltered. Accusations slowed. Juries hesitated. The hangman's rope grew still. But for those already executed, it was too late. 19 hanged. 1 pressed to death. Over 100 more still languished in prison, many awaiting release only if they paid heavy fees for their chains and boards. The fever had broken, but Salem would never be the same. The villagers began to awaken from their nightmare, only to face the darker truth. They themselves had been the devil in Salem. By early 1693, the witch panic in Salem was dying, but the scars it left were raw and unhealed. The prisons began to empty, though many who walked free did so broken in body and spirit. Families who had lost loved ones at Gallows Hill returned to homes filled with silence, their grief mingling with rage. Governor Phipps, seeking to restore order, pardoned many still awaiting trial, but he could not resurrect the dead. The court that had once thundered with accusations now stood quiet, its judges uneasy under the weight of their own decisions. Chief Justice Staunton, unrepentant, insisted that the executions were righteous, yet others and ministers, jurors, villagers, began to confess their doubts aloud. The afflicted girls, once untouchable, now faced suspicion. Had they truly been victims, or had they been instruments of envy, vengeance, and fear? Some faded quietly into obscurity. Others, like Putnam Jr., would carry the burden of guilt for decades. Salem itself seemed cursed, though not by witches. The harvest faltered, trade slowed, families quarreled over seized lands of the condemned. The village, once united in faith, now lived in quiet mistrust. Neighbors who had testified against each other avoided eye contact at the meeting house. Whispers spread. The devil had indeed walked in Salem, not through witches, but through the madness of ordinary men and women. The executions had ended, but the haunting had only begun. Years passed, yet the memory of 1692 clung to Salem like a curse. The village could not shake the shadow of Gallows Hill, nor the cries of the innocent who had died upon the rope. By 1697, the colony of Massachusetts declared a day of fasting and prayer, a time to beg God's forgiveness for the blood spilled. In the meeting houses, villagers bowed their heads, some weeping as sermons thundered about guilt and mercy. Yet forgiveness was slow to come. Some of the very accusers stepped forward to repent. Most striking of all was Putnam Jr., one of the girls whose testimony had sent so many to their deaths. In 1706, she stood before the church and confessed publicly, "I desire to lie in the dust, and to be humbled for the mischief done. I was deluded by Satan." Her voice trembled, but the damage had long been done. Dozens of families still mourned. Generations would remember the names of those lost: Rebecca Nurse, George Burroughs, Giles Corey, Martha Corey, and many more. The courts, too, sought to atone. In 1711, the colony passed a bill clearing the names of the condemned and offered financial restitution to their heirs. Yet no amount of silver could erase the memory of the scaffold, nor the sight of neighbors turning on one another. The legacy of Salem was no longer just about witches. It was about fear, faith, and the fragile line between justice and hysteria. The people prayed, fasted, and confessed, but the ground of Salem remained heavy with its secret, and some wondered, could a town ever truly repent for becoming its own executioner? Centuries have passed since the winter of 1692, yet the story of the Salem Witch Trials still chills the imagination. What began with the fits of a handful of girls ended in the deaths of 20 innocent people, the imprisonment of over 100, and a stain on history that can never be washed away. Salem itself eventually became a symbol, not of witchcraft, but of hysteria and injustice. The trials taught a lesson that echoed far beyond New England: how fear, when left unchecked, can corrupt justice, destroy communities, and turn faith into a weapon. Historians now see the witch trials as a perfect storm, a community strained by war, disease, strict religion, and old grudges. The devil may not have walked in Salem, but human weakness, envy, and fear certainly did. Today, visitors walk the streets of Salem, past museums, memorials, and the stone markers where the victims' names are etched. Tourists hear of Giles Corey's defiance, Rebecca Nurse's dignity, and George Burroughs' final prayer. They are stories not only of tragedy, but of courage in the face of injustice. The Salem Witch Trials remain a mirror held up to humanity, a reminder of how quickly truth can be drowned out by fear, how easily neighbors can become enemies, and how costly justice becomes when blinded by zeal. And though centuries separate us from that haunted village, the voices of Salem still whisper, "Beware the shadow of fear, for it can turn any town into a gallows."